A father and daughter set out for a peaceful weekend sail, and they never returned. For 12 years, one woman lived with heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a mystery that consumed every part of her life. But when she finally uncovered the truth, it was more devastating than she ever imagined. This is the story of Mark and Emily, a loving dad and his 12-year-old daughter, who left their North Carolina marina on a sunny June morning in 2010, smiling, laughing, and full of plans for the weekend ahead. By all accounts, it was supposed to be just another family sailing trip, like so many before. But this time, they didn't come back. Days later, their sailboat was found drifting off the coast. The engine still running, the sails flapping wildly in the wind, untouched supplies still packed on board, but not a single trace of Mark or Emily. Was it a tragic accident? Did they fall overboard and drown? Or was there something far more sinister beneath the surface? For Rachel, Mark's wife, and Emily's mother, the nightmare began the moment they missed their expected return. Calls went unanswered. The Coast Guard launched search after search. But the water remained silent, hiding its secrets. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, Rachel refused to give up. Theories came and went. The media moved on. But Rachel stayed locked in a painful limbo, caught between hope and despair, unable to move forward without answers. And then, 12 years later, a discovery would crack the case wide open. A long-forgotten witness. A hidden, dust-covered notebook in the back of a drawer. And a secret life that Mark had buried beneath layers of lies and desperation. What drives a father to disappear with his own child? How does a family man become a fugitive from his own life? And why did it take more than a decade for the truth to finally surface? Today, we're unraveling the chilling case of Mark and Emily. A story of love, betrayal, survival, and one mother's relentless pursuit of the truth. But before we begin, here's a question for you. If someone you loved vanished under mysterious circumstances, would you believe they were still out there, waiting to come home? Or would you fear the worst? Tell us in the comments below. Because as this story unfolds, you'll see just how quickly the people we trust the most can become the source of our deepest heartbreak. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It was one of those early summer mornings that felt almost too perfect to be real. The sky was clear, painted with soft pastel hues as the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon. The waters off the North Carolina coast were unusually calm, glistening and smooth, like glass. For Mark and his 12-year-old daughter Emily, it felt like the beginning of another unforgettable weekend at sea. Sailing wasn't just a hobby for Mark, it was part of who he was. A seasoned sailor, he had grown up navigating these very waters, learning every channel, every shift in the wind, every hidden sandbar. From the time Emily was a toddler, Mark had made it a point to share that love with her. Weekends were often spent teaching her how to read the tides, trim the sails, and steer through open water. Emily loved it. Being on the boat with her dad felt like freedom. No homework. No school stress. Just the sea breeze in her hair and the thrill of adventure ahead. On this particular morning in June 2010, Mark had gone through his usual meticulous pre-sail routine. He checked the rigging twice. Replenished their food and water supplies. Double-checked the weather forecast. Conditions looked ideal, clear skies, light winds, and no storms predicted for the next several days. Rachel, Mark's wife and Emily's mother, stayed behind at home, trusting that everything would go according to plan, just like it always had. Mark even made a quick call to Rachel before they left the marina. His voice was cheerful, relaxed. "Hey, Rachel," he said with a laugh, "just wanted to check in before we head out." Emily's already manning the ropes like a pro. "The weather's perfect. We'll be back by Sunday evening. Don't worry. Love you, talk soon." It was a typical check-in. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would hint at the tragedy about to unfold. Mark and Emily set sail from the dock at Morehead City, waving to other sailors as they passed. Fellow boaters later recalled seeing them leave, Mark at the helm, Emily standing near the bow, her hair whipping in the morning breeze. They both looked happy, excited even, as they disappeared into the distance. Their plan was simple: sail toward the nearby barrier islands, drop anchor for the night, enjoy some fishing, and head back by the end of the weekend. Mark had done this trip countless times before. There was no reason to think this one would be any different. The sun rose higher, casting golden reflections across the water. Emily giggled as dolphins surfaced near the boat, leaping playfully alongside them. Mark snapped a few photos on his phone, pictures that would become the last memories anyone had of them together. To anyone watching from the shore, it was a perfect father-daughter outing. But that would be the last time anyone saw them alive. And within 48 hours, their absence would spark one of the most haunting missing persons cases the North Carolina coastline had ever seen. It was one of those early summer mornings that felt almost too perfect to be real. The air was warm but crisp. The sky, a soft blend of pinks and oranges, as the first light of dawn stretched over the North Carolina coastline. The water, unusually calm. Glistening like liquid glass. For Mark and his 12-year-old daughter, Emily, this was their happy place. Sailing wasn't just a weekend hobby for them, it was a family tradition. Mark had learned the art of sailing from his own father, and now, he was passing that love down to Emily. Since she was little, Emily had loved being on the water. The smell of salt air, the sound of waves lapping against the hull, the thrill of holding the wheel in her hands as the boat cut through the sea. Mark was meticulous when it came to preparation. That morning, he ran through every safety check twice. Life jackets? Secured. Emergency radio? Fully charged. Weather forecast? Clear skies, light winds, and no storms on the radar for days. Rachel, Mark's wife and Emily's mother, stayed behind at home, like she had for so many of their weekend trips. She trusted Mark implicitly. This was routine. Before setting off, Mark gave Rachel a quick call. His voice was full of life, cheerful and relaxed. "Hey, Rachel," he said, "just wanted to check in before we head out. Emily's already manning the ropes like a pro. The weather's perfect. We'll be back by Sunday evening. Don't worry. Love you, talk soon." It was the kind of call Rachel had received dozens of times before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. By 8 a.m., the small sailboat pulled away from the dock at Morehead City Marina. Fellow boaters later remembered seeing them leave, Mark at the helm, sunglasses on, waving to friends along the pier. Emily stood near the bow, her hair whipping in the breeze, laughing as a group of pelicans flew overhead. Their plan was simple: sail toward the nearby barrier islands, drop anchor, spend the night stargazing on deck, maybe catch a few fish for dinner, and return home by late Sunday. The weather was textbook perfect for sailing. Dolphins surfaced alongside their boat, riding the wake and leaping in playful arcs. Mark even took a few photos on his phone, pictures Rachel would later hold onto like lifelines to a past she could never get back. As they sailed further from shore, Mark adjusted the sails and glanced at Emily with a proud smile. She had grown so much in the last year, more confident, more independent. Their bond had never been stronger. From the shoreline, anyone watching would have seen nothing more than a loving father and daughter, disappearing over the horizon on a perfect summer day. But what no one knew was that this would be the last time anyone saw Mark and Emily alive. And within just 48 hours, the peaceful waters they loved would become the center of a desperate search and a mystery that would haunt an entire community for years to come. Sunday evening arrived, and Rachel stood by the front window, glancing out at the driveway for the third time in an hour. The clock ticked past 6 p.m., then 7, then 8. Mark and Emily were supposed to be home by now. At first, Rachel didn't panic. Sailing trips often ran late. Mark had been known to squeeze every last minute out of a weekend adventure. Maybe they had decided to watch the sunset a little longer, maybe they were just taking their time packing up at the marina. But as the hours dragged on, that quiet concern in Rachel's stomach grew into something colder, heavier. By 9 p.m., she called Mark's phone. No answer. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. Then she called Emily's cell. Nothing. Rachel called the marina next, hoping someone had seen them arrive. But no one had. Fellow sailors hadn't seen them since they left Friday morning. By midnight, worry gave way to dread. Rachel barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mark's last words on the phone, "We'll be back by Sunday evening. Don't worry." By sunrise Monday morning, Rachel's fear became undeniable. She called the Coast Guard. Within hours, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. Helicopters swept over the coastline, their searchlights scanning every inch of water. Patrol boats zigzagged across the waves. Rescue divers were dispatched to check shallow areas and inlets. The Coast Guard expanded the search area mile by mile, but every call over the radio came back the same, no sign. Rachel drove down to the marina. She stood on the docks for hours, pacing, clutching her phone like a lifeline, staring at the horizon with tear-filled eyes. Friends and neighbors showed up to support her, but even their presence couldn't calm the growing sense of doom. For 2 agonizing days, the search intensified. Local volunteers joined in. Nearby fishermen altered their routes, keeping watch for any floating debris, any sign of life, or worse. But there was nothing. No wreckage. No flares. No emergency calls recorded. Then, late Tuesday afternoon, a break. A local fishing boat spotted a small sailboat drifting aimlessly off the coast, miles from where Mark and Emily were expected to be. When rescue teams boarded the vessel, what they found left everyone speechless. The boat was intact. The engine, still running, though almost out of fuel. The sails flapped wildly in the afternoon breeze. Left unsecured for hours, maybe longer. Inside the cabin, everything appeared untouched. Life jackets hung neatly on hooks. The cooler was still full of food and drinks. Emily's favorite hoodie sat folded on the bench seat. Fishing rods, still stored away, untouched. Mark's wallet and cell phone, both on board. There were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No spilled supplies. No distress signals had been sent. The Coast Guard checked the boat's radio, fully operational. The GPS showed the vessel had been slowly drifting off course for nearly 48 hours. But there was no clue, none, as to why Mark had stopped steering, or where they had gone. Divers were sent into the surrounding waters. They searched for miles in every direction. The area was mapped, currents were studied, but no bodies, no clothing, no floating debris. It was as if Mark and Emily had stepped off the boat and simply vanished. Local media swarmed the marina. Headlines flooded the news of father and daughter missing at sea, boat found adrift and empty. Community members held vigils. Rachel appeared on the local news, her voice shaking as she pleaded for help. "If anyone knows anything, please. Please come forward. This isn't like Mark. This isn't like Emily. They wouldn't just disappear." Behind the scenes, investigators were growing concerned. Cases like this, where boats are found fully operational but empty, are rare. And when they do happen, they often don't end well. Theories swirled among the search teams. Had they fallen overboard? Was it a freak accident? Or had something darker taken place? As Rachel waited by the phone, scanning every incoming call, she couldn't shake one terrible thought. Had she missed something? Was there a sign she hadn't seen? Her family, gone. Her questions, just beginning. The morning after the boat was found, the Coast Guard intensified their efforts. Search grids were expanded. New helicopters joined the air patrols. Divers were deployed once again, focusing not just on the area where the boat was recovered, but stretching miles in every direction, following currents and drift patterns. The ocean had become a search zone. From the air, the water looked deceptively calm, blue and endless. But beneath the surface, anything could be hidden. Rescue teams scoured every inlet, every stretch of coastline. Even remote barrier islands were searched by foot. For Rachel, those days felt like living inside a nightmare. She stayed at the marina, refusing to leave. Friends brought her coffee. Others brought food she never touched. Rachel couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, her eyes darted to her phone, hoping, praying, for a call that would bring good news. Neighbors organized a community search party. Boats owned by local fishermen and private citizens joined the official efforts, volunteering to comb through areas the Coast Guard hadn't reached yet. Radio chatter filled the airwaves, constant updates from search teams, shifting search zones, and status checks from exhausted crews. But with every passing hour, hope began to fade. The first 48 hours in any missing persons case are critical. After that, the odds drop sharply. By day 4, the tone of the search changed. What started as a rescue operation slowly turned into a recovery mission. The Coast Guard officers stopped using the words search and rescue. They began referring to it as a search and recovery. Rachel noticed the shift immediately. They're not looking for them alive anymore, she whispered to a friend. The media coverage intensified. News vans parked outside the marina. Reporters shoved microphones into Rachel's face. National outlets picked up the story: father and daughter vanish at sea, search continues with no answers in sight. Social media exploded with theories. Some believed it was a tragic accident. Others speculated about mechanical failure. A few internet sleuths began whispering darker possibilities. Had there been foul play? Could pirates have been involved? Was there something Mark was running from? Rachel tried to block out the noise. Every day, she stood at the dock, staring out across the water that had always felt like a friend, but now felt like an enemy. Investigators began to dig deeper into the case. They interviewed everyone who had seen Mark and Emily before they left. Fellow sailors recalled nothing unusual. Mark had appeared calm, happy. Emily had been her usual cheerful self. The weather reports confirmed what Rachel already knew: clear skies. Light winds. No storms. No rogue waves reported in the area. Mark's boat had no history of mechanical issues. It had passed inspection only a few months earlier. There were no signs of theft. No indication of forced entry or sabotage. The fact that the boat was found with its engine running and its contents untouched puzzled everyone. Statistically, if people fall overboard, there's often evidence left behind: shoes on the deck, life jackets hastily grabbed, a tangle of fishing gear. Something. But here, there was nothing. Everything on the boat was eerily normal. The lead investigator, Officer Karen DeWitt, voiced what many were already thinking. This case doesn't fit the usual patterns, she said during a press conference. We're treating it as a missing persons case with unusual circumstances. Every theory is on the table. Rachel found herself clinging to hope, but as the days stretched into weeks, that hope became harder to hold on to. She replayed every memory she had with Mark and Emily, wondering if she had missed something. Some nights, she stood at the shoreline long after the sun went down, staring out over the dark water, whispering their names, as if calling them home. But the ocean stayed silent. And with each passing day, the chances of finding them alive slipped further away. By the end of the second week, the active search officially ended. The Coast Guard called off their operation, leaving Rachel devastated. The words she feared most became reality: the case had gone cold. As the days turned into weeks, and the official search came to an end, one thing became painfully clear: there were no easy answers. But that didn't stop people from speculating. For Rachel, the uncertainty was torture. With no evidence, no sightings, and no communication, her mind spiraled through every possible scenario. And she wasn't alone. Investigators, journalists, and internet sleuths all started asking the same questions: what happened to Mark and Emily? Theories began to pile up, each more confusing and more heartbreaking than the last. Theory 1, accidental drowning. The first and most obvious theory was that Mark and Emily had simply fallen overboard. Perhaps they were adjusting the sails, maybe Emily slipped, and in trying to save her, Mark went in after her. The Coast Guard focused heavily on this possibility. They calculated drift patterns, mapped the water's currents, and searched the surrounding seafloor for days. But there were problems with this theory. The boat was still running. The sails were loose. And most telling of all, their life jackets were untouched and still hanging inside the cabin. Mark was a seasoned sailor. If Emily had fallen in, there was no way Mark wouldn't have thrown her a flotation device, or called for help. Plus, the waters in that area were relatively shallow. And the weather that weekend had been perfect: clear skies, light winds, calm seas. By week 3, even investigators admitted that the drowning theory didn't fit. Theory 2, a medical emergency. Next came the theory of a sudden medical event. Could Mark have suffered a heart attack or stroke while at sea? Investigators dug into Mark's medical records. But there was no history of heart disease. No medications that pointed to any serious condition. And Emily? At just 12 years old, she was young, healthy, and active. Even if Mark had collapsed, Emily would have known how to use the radio. Mark had taught her emergency procedures since she was little. This theory, like the first, began to crumble under scrutiny. Theory 3, foul play. That's when the conversation shifted. Had someone else been involved? Could another boat have approached them at sea? Piracy was rare in these waters, but not unheard of. Investigators began looking into reports of suspicious vessels in the area. They interviewed nearby fishermen and cargo ship crews. But no one reported seeing anything out of the ordinary that weekend. No nearby boats. No distress calls. Nothing. They even conducted forensic sweeps of the sailboat, checking for fingerprints, foreign DNA, or any signs of forced entry. Again, nothing. The boat was clean. If foul play had occurred, it left no physical trace. Theory 4, voluntary disappearance. Then came the most controversial theory of all. What if Mark had chosen to disappear? It sounded unthinkable. Mark had no history of erratic behavior. No criminal record. No known enemies. And yet, the lack of evidence, combined with the still-running boat and the untouched supplies, forced investigators to consider the possibility. Had Mark staged the entire disappearance? Had he planned to vanish, taking Emily with him? Rachel rejected the idea immediately. Mark would never do that, she told reporters during an emotional interview. He loved Emily. He loved me. There's no way he would hurt us like that. But investigators still had to explore it. They pulled Mark's financial records. Reviewed his emails. Spoke to his coworkers. Looked for signs of hidden stress, gambling debts, secret affairs, anything that might suggest a motive to run. And at first, they found nothing. Mark appeared to be a loving husband, a responsible father, a reliable friend and employee. But as weeks turned to months, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Small things. Missed payments on the mortgage. An unusual number of ATM withdrawals in the months leading up to the trip. An old friend mentioned that Mark had seemed distant in the weeks before he disappeared, distracted, on edge. Nothing definitive. Nothing investigators could call a smoking gun. But enough to raise questions. Contradictory witness statements adding to the confusion were the witness reports. One sailor claimed to have seen Mark's boat heading north, toward the Barrier Islands, just after noon that Friday. But another witness insisted they spotted the same boat heading southeast, several miles offshore. Later that same afternoon. Both witnesses seemed credible. Both were experienced boaters familiar with the local waters. But both couldn't be right. Either the boat had changed course dramatically, or one of the witnesses was mistaken. To complicate things further, radar data from that weekend was incomplete. A power outage at one of the local maritime monitoring stations meant there was a 2-hour gap in recorded vessel movements, right around the time Mark and Emily were believed to have gone missing. For investigators, the case was turning into a logistical nightmare. Every lead led to another dead end. The emotional toll on Rachel, the uncertainty became unbearable. She stopped going to work. Friends began noticing her weight loss. The dark circles under her eyes became permanent fixtures. She spent her days contacting investigators, searching online forums for missing persons cases, and walking the docks at the marina, staring at the water as if willing it to give her back her family. Local police, overwhelmed and short-staffed, slowly deprioritized the case. Tips stopped coming in. The media moved on. And Rachel was left, alone with her unanswered questions. Was Mark gone forever? Had Emily been taken against her will? Or had her husband orchestrated something that none of them could yet understand? For nearly a year, Rachel lived in that limbo. No answers. No closure. Only the haunting, unanswered question, what really happened to Mark and Emily? As the months dragged on, and hope seemed to fade, Rachel found herself standing at a crossroads between despair and determination. Giving up was never an option. While friends and family gently suggested she try to move forward, Rachel refused. She couldn't accept that her husband and daughter were simply gone. Not without answers. Not without the truth. And so, she became her own investigator. She started with the obvious, visiting the marina daily, talking to fellow boaters, asking if anyone remembered anything unusual from that weekend. But as weeks turned into months, Rachel realized she had to cast a wider net. She began contacting local news stations, making public pleas on camera, her voice shaking but steady. Staring directly into the lens as she begged anyone with information to come forward. Someone out there knows something, please, help me find my family. Her story gained traction. Newspapers published follow-up articles. Community groups hosted fundraisers to help cover the cost of private search efforts. But still, no solid leads. Determined not to let the investigation go cold, Rachel took the next step. She hired a private investigator. John Harris, a former detective with a reputation for solving cold cases, agreed to take on Rachel's search. Within days, John began re-interviewing witnesses, combing through Coast Guard reports, and analyzing the GPS data from Mark's boat. One thing quickly became clear to him: the timeline didn't add up. The gaps in witness sightings, the missing 2 hours of radar coverage, the lack of distress signals, all pointed to one chilling fact: something had happened that weekend, something carefully orchestrated, or something so sudden and unexplained that it defied logic. John encouraged Rachel to dig deeper into Mark's personal life. That's when she started noticing small things she had overlooked before. Unopened letters from the bank. Credit card statements with unusual charges. Voicemails Mark had deleted but forgotten to erase from their shared cloud backup. They were fragments. Nothing conclusive. But they painted a picture of a man who, in the months leading up to his disappearance, was under more pressure than Rachel had realized. Financial strain. Sleepless nights. Withdrawn behavior. And yet, there was still no clear link to what had happened. Rachel refused to let the investigation stall. She organized community awareness events. Set up a website dedicated to finding Mark and Emily. Shared their story on online forums for missing persons cases. Every time she felt exhaustion creeping in, she reminded herself, this isn't just about closure, it's about bringing them home. John Harris continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. A gas station security camera, an old dockworker's journal, even outdated marina logs. Still, no breakthrough. Then, just after the 1-year anniversary of their disappearance, Rachel got a phone call that would change everything. A local fisherman, Peter Donovan, who had been out near the area where the boat was found that weekend, had something new to share. He hadn't come forward earlier, thinking his observation was unimportant. But after seeing a recent news special about Rachel's ongoing search, something clicked. Peter remembered seeing a small, unfamiliar boat in the distance, shortly before the Coast Guard had discovered Mark's abandoned vessel. But the man piloting that boat didn't match Mark's description. I didn't think much of it at the time, Peter said, but it's been bugging me ever since. It wasn't Mark. It was someone else. And the boat wasn't from around here. For Rachel, it was the first new lead in over a year. John Harris jumped on the tip immediately, cross-referencing local marina records, searching for any vessels that matched Peter's vague description. And that's when they discovered a long-forgotten piece of evidence, a grainy security camera feed from a small private dock, showing a mysterious boat leaving the area the morning after Mark and Emily vanished. 2 people were visible on board. Neither of them appeared to be Mark. The faces were blurred. The footage was low quality. But it was enough to breathe life back into the investigation. For the first time in over a year, Rachel had hope. A single thread of evidence, fragile, but real. And she was determined to pull on it, until she unraveled the truth. The call came just after 7 p.m. on a cold February evening. Rachel was sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by old photographs of Mark and Emily, when her phone rang. It was John Harris, the private investigator she'd hired nearly a year earlier. His voice sounded different this time. Urgent. Rachel, we've got something. Her heart skipped. John explained that a local fisherman, Peter Donovan, had just come forward. Peter had been out on the water the same weekend Mark and Emily vanished. For months, he hadn't thought twice about something he'd seen. But after catching Rachel's emotional TV interview the night before, something stirred in him. He called John immediately. Peter recalled seeing a small, unfamiliar boat moving through the area, not far from where Mark's sailboat was later discovered. And the person piloting that boat definitely wasn't Mark. I didn't think much of it at the time, Peter said, but the more I see your face on the news, the more it's been bugging me. That boat wasn't from around here. And the guy driving it, older, wearing a dark jacket, looked like he was in a hurry. Peter described the vessel in detail, about 20 feet long, dark blue hull, no visible registration numbers, a design unfamiliar to most locals. John wasted no time. He dug through security camera footage from every nearby marina and private dock. Dozens of hours of grainy, low-res video. Most of it showed nothing unusual. Until, finally, a breakthrough. A single, shadowy clip. From a small private dock about 15 miles from where Mark's abandoned boat had been found. The timestamp? The morning after Mark and Emily disappeared. In the footage, the dark blue boat pulled away from the dock at dawn. 2 figures on board. Neither of them matching Mark's description. Their faces were indistinct, blurred by distance and poor camera quality. But their movements rushed. Their body language tense. They loaded supplies into the boat with quick, deliberate motions. Like people in a hurry to disappear. Rachel watched the footage on John's laptop, her hands trembling. "Who are they?" she whispered. "And where are they going?" John shook his head. "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out." In the days that followed, John launched a full investigation into the mystery vessel. He visited nearby harbors. Questioned dock workers. Checked boat sales records, Coast Guard logs, and fuel purchase reports. But whoever these people were, they'd covered their tracks. No registration. No docking records. No Coast Guard alerts. It was as if the boat, and its passengers, had vanished into thin air. Rachel's emotions swung between hope and dread. This was the first new lead in over a year, but it opened up a chilling new possibility. What if Mark and Emily weren't alone on that water after all? Who were these strangers, and what role did they play in her family's disappearance? The mystery had deepened, but for the first time in months. Rachel had something she hadn't felt in a long time. Momentum. And she wasn't about to let it go. It had been almost 18 months since Mark and Emily disappeared. Rachel sat alone on her bedroom floor, surrounded by unopened boxes. For over a year, she had avoided this room, these drawers, these memories. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the tip from Peter Donovan, the footage of the mysterious boat, or just the slow realization that the official investigation had stalled. If she didn't keep looking, no one would. With shaking hands, Rachel opened the bottom drawer of Mark's old desk. Piles of loose papers. Old boat maintenance logs. Receipts. A few faded photographs from past sailing trips. And then, something tucked deep in the back. A small, weathered leather-bound notebook. Her heart stopped. She pulled it out, feeling the rough texture under her fingers, and slowly flipped it open. Mark's handwriting. At first, it seemed harmless. Tide schedules. Grocery lists. Notes about weekend plans. But as she turned the pages, the tone changed. The neat, orderly handwriting began to slope and stagger. Sentences grew frantic. Margins were filled with scribbled side notes. And the content. It wasn't just about sailing anymore. Rachel's throat tightened as she read entries filled with anxiety and desperation. I'm drowning, and no one sees it. The debt collectors won't stop. I've failed them both. Her hands trembled as she turned another page, revealing what appeared to be a step-by-step outline. At the top, in capital letters, Mark had written, the plan. Rachel's eyes widened. The list beneath was chilling: liquidate small assets. Transfer cash into untraceable accounts. Stock the boat with emergency rations and extra fuel. Avoid using credit cards. Stay off the radar. Take Emily. She froze at that last line. Take Emily? Rachel's mind raced. Was this real? Had Mark actually planned to disappear? The next few pages made it impossible to deny. Scattered throughout were references to false alibis, intentionally vague travel plans, and even research into small, remote marinas along the coast where they could dock unnoticed. In the margins, frantic questions were scribbled. New identities? Disappear for good? What if she doesn't understand? Tears filled Rachel's eyes. The man she thought she knew, the man she loved, had been unraveling for months, right in front of her, and she hadn't seen it. Her heart felt like it was breaking all over again. By the time she reached the final pages, Rachel's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the notebook. She grabbed her phone and called John Harris. Within hours, the journal was in the hands of a forensic handwriting analyst, and Dr. Lisa Graham, a criminal psychologist known for her work on missing persons cases. Dr. Graham spent days analyzing the content, cross-referencing the dates, comparing the psychological markers in Mark's writing. Her final assessment was devastating. Rachel. I'm sorry, but there's no doubt, she said gently during their meeting. This isn't just a stressed-out father venting. This is the written profile of someone preparing to vanish. Rachel sat frozen. But why? Why would he do this? Why wouldn't he just talk to me? Dr. Graham offered a long, quiet sigh. From what I can gather, Mark was trapped in a spiral of financial anxiety and emotional isolation. His notes suggest he believed he was protecting Emily. In his mind, disappearing wasn't abandonment, it was survival. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. But he didn't even give me a chance to help him, she whispered. Dr. Graham nodded sadly. That's the heartbreaking part about cases like this, she said. When someone feels cornered, when they're drowning in fear and guilt, their logic twists. They make decisions that seem unthinkable to the rest of us. For Rachel, the journal answered some questions. But it opened even more painful ones. How long had Mark been planning this? Had Emily gone willingly? Or had she been taken against her will? And most haunting of all, where were they now? Alive? Hiding? Or had something gone horribly wrong, even after Mark's plan was set in motion? The answers, still out there, waiting. And Rachel, more determined than ever, to find them. The discovery of Mark's journal had shaken Rachel to her core, but it also reignited the investigation. For the first time in over a year, there was context. A motive. Mark hadn't been the victim of some random accident. He had been planning something drastic. But there was still one crucial piece missing. Where had he taken Emily? John Harris doubled down on his efforts. The information from Peter Donovan's sighting, combined with the security footage of the unknown boat, and now, the journal, painted a disturbing timeline. John created a detailed map, plotting the boat's drift, the missing hours, the gaps in radar coverage. There was one stretch of coastline that stood out, a remote area about 30 miles south, near a chain of small, mostly uninhabited islands. Places where someone could lay low, unnoticed. John decided to investigate in person. He rented a small powerboat and spent days exploring the area. On the third day, he found something. A makeshift campsite. hidden in a thicket of trees on one of the larger islands, barely visible from the water. The remains of an old fire pit. Rusted food cans. A child's sandal, half buried in the sand. John's pulse quickened. He photographed everything, bagged the sandal for testing, and called Rachel immediately. "I think I've found where they were," he said. By the next morning, forensic teams were on site. They combed the area, uncovering more evidence: empty water containers, wrappers from granola bars, even a torn corner of what appeared to be a map with hand-drawn markings, showing possible routes further south. But the most heartbreaking find was something small. Near the tree line, partially buried, was Emily's bracelet. A simple woven band with tiny, colorful beads. Rachel had made it for her the previous Christmas. Holding it in her hands, Rachel broke down for the first time in months. "She was here," she whispered. But where were they now? Forensic analysis dated the camp debris to about a year earlier, suggesting Mark and Emily had stayed on the island shortly after their disappearance, but had since moved on. The trail, once again, had gone cold. Until a discovery from John changed everything. Digging deeper into local marina records, John cross-referenced boat fuel purchases from the week following Mark and Emily's disappearance. One entry stood out. A small, private marina, 40 miles south, had a cash purchase for fuel logged under a false name, matching the type of vessel seen in the security footage. John drove down immediately, speaking to the marina manager. At first, the manager couldn't remember much. But when John showed him a blown-up still image of the mystery boat, recognition flickered across the man's face. "Yeah, I remember that boat. They left early. Real early. Like, before sunrise." John's heart raced. "They?" "Yeah, 2 people. A man and a kid. The guy paid cash. Didn't say much. Just filled up, and left heading south. South. Toward open waters, and further away from civilization." For Rachel, this was both terrifying and hopeful. Emily had been alive. At least for a while. John expanded his investigation again, now focusing on marinas, small ports, and secluded docks along the southern coastline. With the help of Dr. Graham, they began profiling Mark's potential destinations. Isolated communities. Coastal towns with minimal law enforcement presence. Places where a man and a child could blend in. Start over, unnoticed. John worked day and night. He contacted missing persons organizations. Issued new public bulletins. And then, 2 months after finding the campsite, another breakthrough. A woman in a small town along the Georgia coast called in a tip. She had seen Rachel's latest interview on TV, and something clicked. A man and a young girl had rented a small beach house in her neighborhood. About a year earlier. They stayed for several months. The man told people he was a writer, working on a book, homeschooling his daughter. They kept to themselves. Never invited visitors. Always paid rent in cash. When the woman showed John an old photo she had snapped during a community event, his heart sank. It was blurry, but clear enough. The man was Mark. And standing next to him, holding his hand, was Emily. Rachel's world stopped. Proof. Visual proof. They had been alive. But the woman explained they left suddenly, one night, without saying goodbye. Neighbors woke up the next morning, and the beach house was empty. No forwarding address. No explanation. Gone again. But now, there was a real trail. For the first time. Authorities had a location, a time frame, and faces that could be shared publicly. The missing persons case was officially reopened. And for Rachel, the long, agonizing wait turned into action. Mark and Emily were out there, somewhere. And this time, she wouldn't stop until she found them. The reopening of the case brought fresh momentum. Photos of Mark and Emily, captured at that small Georgia beach town, circulated across news outlets and social media. Rachel's story went national again. Hotlines lit up with tips from people claiming to have seen them. Some were false alarms, others, disturbingly close. Then, 2 weeks after the latest broadcast, a break came. A call from a motel manager in a small Florida town, about 150 miles south of where the last sighting occurred. "I'm pretty sure that's your guy," the manager said. "They've been staying here under fake names. Left about an hour ago, headed west." By the time authorities arrived, Mark and Emily were gone again. But this time, there was a clue left behind. Security footage showed Mark loading their belongings into an old, beat-up van. For the first time in 2 years, law enforcement had a vehicle description. An Amber Alert was issued for Emily, now 14 years old. Roadblocks went up across state lines. The FBI joined the case, treating it as a federal child abduction. For Rachel, the wait was excruciating. Every time her phone rang, her heart stopped. Then, 3 days after the Amber Alert, the call came. "We found them." Authorities had tracked Mark's van to a small, wooded campground outside Mobile, Alabama. In the early morning hours, federal agents and local police surrounded the site. The confrontation was brief and heartbreaking. Mark was found sitting by a small campfire. Emily beside him, visibly thin and pale, her eyes distant. When agents approached, Mark didn't resist. He stood slowly, raised his hands, and surrendered without a word. Emily clung to her father, confused, frightened, but safe. Rachel drove through the night to reach her daughter. Their reunion at the hospital was raw and overwhelming. Rachel held Emily for what felt like hours, sobbing into her hair, whispering apologies and promises she hadn't been able to make for 2 years. Emily cried too. But there was distance in her eyes. The kind of distance that comes from confusion, isolation, and 2 years of being told a different version of reality. Mark was taken into federal custody. The charges were severe: parental kidnapping, fraudulent use of identification, endangering the welfare of a child, crossing state lines to avoid prosecution. In the days following his arrest, details emerged from Mark's interviews with authorities. He admitted everything. Yes, he had planned the disappearance. Yes, he had taken Emily, believing he was protecting her from what he called a looming financial and emotional collapse. Mark described months of feeling trapped, financially, emotionally, mentally. In his mind, vanishing had seemed like the only way out. But as the reality set in, living on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder, keeping Emily isolated, it had all taken a toll. Emily, according to psychologists, had been emotionally manipulated. Mark had told her they were running from people who wanted to hurt them. He kept her off social media, changed their locations every few months, homeschooled her using old textbooks. She hadn't seen a doctor, hadn't spoken to friends. For 2 years, her world had been reduced to motel rooms, campsites, and her father's increasingly erratic stories. During the trial, the courtroom was filled with emotion. Rachel sat behind the prosecution, holding a small photograph of Emily from before the disappearance. Mark appeared thinner, older, haunted. The prosecution laid out the evidence: the journal, the security footage, the eyewitness statements, the months of deliberate evasion. Mark's defense team argued that he had been mentally unwell. Not malicious, just desperate. They portrayed him as a broken man, overwhelmed by financial pressure, fear, and deteriorating mental health. But the jury saw it differently. After days of testimony, they returned with a guilty verdict. Mark was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. For Rachel, the sentencing brought mixed emotions. There was relief that Emily was finally safe. But there was also grief, knowing that the man she had once loved had caused so much pain. The road to healing for Emily was long. Therapy sessions, family counseling, rebuilding trust, one small step at a time. Emily struggled with guilt, anger, and confusion. Some days, she missed her father terribly. Other days, she struggled to forgive him. Rachel stood by her through it all. determined to help her daughter rebuild a sense of safety and truth. As months passed, Rachel began to share her story publicly, not just as a way to heal, but to help other families going through similar nightmares. She became an advocate for missing children cases, speaking at conferences, appearing on talk shows, working with organizations that support families left behind. Rachel's message was simple, but powerful. If you know someone struggling, talk to them. If you feel overwhelmed, reach out. Secrets, isolation, and silence can tear families apart in ways you can never undo. Her strength, her persistence, and her love for Emily had brought them both back from the brink. And those scars remained. Rachel knew one thing for sure: they had survived. And together, they were moving forward. Rachel's journey had come full circle. What started as a sunny weekend sailing trip had unraveled into a 2-year nightmare of confusion, heartbreak, and relentless searching. The truth, as devastating as it was, had finally come to light. Mark wasn't lost at sea. He hadn't been the victim of foul play. He had made a choice, a series of choices, that tore their family apart. For Rachel, that reality was something she still struggled to accept. There were days when she woke up expecting to find Mark beside her, only to remember he was serving a 20-year sentence in a federal prison. And for Emily, the road to healing was even longer. Therapy sessions became a regular part of her life. Some days she was angry and furious at her father for taking her away, for forcing her to live in fear, for making her believe things that weren't true. Other days, she missed him. Memories of simpler times, weekend picnics, sailing lessons, bedtime stories, surfaced without warning. Emotions clashed inside her, making the healing process slow and complicated. But with Rachel's support, Emily began to rebuild her life. She returned to school, reconnected with friends. Slowly, she started laughing again, finding moments of peace and even joy. For Rachel, advocacy became part of her recovery. She joined organizations dedicated to supporting families of missing persons. She spoke at conferences, shared her story on podcasts and national news shows, and pushed for changes in how missing persons cases were handled, especially when parental abduction was involved. Her message was clear and passionate: no family should feel alone in the search for their loved ones. She also became an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness, sharing Mark's story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of silent suffering, emotional isolation, and untreated mental health struggles. The case of Mark and Emily became a landmark example in missing persons seminars, highlighting the psychological complexities that often go unseen until it is too late. Rachel's bravery, her determination, and her refusal to give up inspired countless people across the country. For viewers like you, this story serves as a powerful reminder: not every disappearance ends the way you expect. Sometimes, the villain isn't a stranger lurking in the dark, but someone you trusted most. Sometimes, the greatest danger is silence. And sometimes, the strongest heroes are the ones who keep fighting, even when the whole world tells them to stop. So now, we want to hear from you. If you were in Rachel's position, how would you have handled this unthinkable situation? Do you think Mark's actions were driven by love, desperation, or something darker? And most importantly, what lessons do you think we should take from this heartbreaking case? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, or if you want to hear more in-depth true crime investigations like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We're committed to bringing you the most compelling, emotional, and thought-provoking true crime documentaries on YouTube. Your support helps us shine a light on cases just like this, giving families the answers they've been searching for. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.